Growing up, fantasy stories always held this strange allure for me. I still remember the feeling of finishing a long series, whether it was Harry Potter or the Chronicles of Narnia, and turning that last page, kind of resurfacing from the dream of the story back into the real world again. And when I would finish those stories, I always had this strange feeling. It was like this ache in my chest. It was almost like I was homesick, but for a world that didn't even exist. Those were the stories that stayed with me longest, the ones that evoked this kind of sadness in me, but it was a good sadness. But I struggled to explain this perceived importance of fantasy to other people, when as I grew older, it seemed more and more like people perceived fantasy as something kind of escapist, something to be kind of put away when you get into the real world. And I definitely think as a fantasy writer, this feeling was multiplied tenfold. So I couldn't really reconcile these two feelings. Like on the one hand, fantasy felt like it was tapping into something of profound importance about the world. And on the other hand, most people seem to consider it kind of juvenile and frivolous. So last month, when all 3 extended remastered Lord of the Rings films were re-released in theaters, I decided to go watch them all again. It had been a couple years, so I was overdue for a marathon. They released all 3 movies over the course of 3 days, so it was 12 hours total. And watching those movies, I was struck all over again by the absolute sincerity of those films. It's this epic quest of hope and love, loyalty and courage. It looks unflinchingly at evil and despair and corruption, but at its heart, it's a story that's full of hope. By the time the credits rolled and I walked out of the theater, I felt that same ache again. I felt like I was a witness of something so beautiful, so powerful and profound, but I had no idea what to do with that feeling. So it just lingered with me for days, this feeling like homesickness or heartbreak. And I think this is a feeling that we're all familiar with as readers and as writers, that there's something there in beauty, in art and story, and whatever this thing is that we're yearning for, it's like just beyond the edge of our imagination. We're always after it, but we can't quite reach it. There's this sense that when we stand in front of something beautiful, so beautiful it almost brings us to tears, we want to respond to it somehow. One of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, put it this way. She said that we need beauty because it makes us ache to be worthy of it. And it's not just writers or readers who experience this feeling, it's universal. There's words for this feeling in multiple languages. I might not be pronouncing these words right, but hereby is a Welsh word that translates roughly as a deep, unattainable longing for something, especially one's home, even a place that may have never actually existed. Saudade is a Portuguese word, and it references an emotional state of melancholic or profoundly nostalgic longing for a beloved yet absent something or someone, and it's often associated with a repressed understanding that one might never encounter the object of their longing ever again. And my favorite is Sehnsucht. It's a German word representing yearning or wistful longing for something that's just out of reach. It's the inconsolable longing in the human heart for we know not what. And yet, all these words share a common desire for untranslatability. In other words, all these words fall short of the meaning. C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite writers and scholars, and he actually spent his entire life trying to put this feeling into words. He calls it our inconsolable longing. He said it's a secret that hurts so much that we take our revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. So even though we might kind of tend to lump this feeling in together with something like nostalgia, he argued that even though we might identify this feeling with moments in our own past, if we were able to go back to the moments themselves and relive them, we wouldn't find the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What we remember would turn out itself to be a remembering. And what's so mysterious to me about this ache is that even though it seems to be something that we universally experience, we all seem to experience it through different things. C.S. Lewis put it this way: "You may have noticed that the books you really love are bound together by a secret thread. You know very well what is the common quality that makes you love them, though you cannot put it into words. But most of your friends do not see it at all, and often wonder why, liking this, you should also like that. All the things that have ever deeply possessed your soul have been but hints of it, tantalizing glimpses, promises never quite fulfilled, echoes that died away just as they caught your ear. But if it should ever become manifest, if there ever came an echo that did not die away but swelled into the sound itself, you would know it. Beyond all possibility of a doubt, you would say, 'Here at last is the thing I was made for.' We cannot tell each other about it. It is the secret signature of each soul, the incommunicable and unappeasable want, the thing we desired before we met our wives or made our friends or chose our work, and which we shall still desire on our deathbeds, when the mind no longer knows wife or friend or work. While we are, this is. If we lose this, we lose all." So in other words, there's certain elements of the world or stories that speak to you and you only. They resonate in a way that nothing else can, in a way that only you seem to understand. I find it really interesting to learn what these things are for different people. For my sister, there's something ineffable about the sight of the sea and wild horses galloping, and she finds it every single time she gallops down a beach on her horse, feeling like she can harness the wind. For one of my brothers, there's something sacred to him about waking up on a backpacking trip in the early morning to see mist rising off a lake and the mountains. For C.S. Lewis, it was a sense of northernness in Norse mythology in particular, a feeling conjured up by empty northern skies, an open landscape of things passing beyond reach, the grandiosity of gods and giants in the realms of Asgard. For me, I've noticed it comes especially powerfully through music, whether that's Irish folk songs or epic orchestral music. Sometimes that feeling will come to me through a certain slant of evening light. It also comes really powerfully to me through memories, especially memories that seem to almost transcend the moment itself. In stories themselves, there's something especially powerful to me about friendship, love and sacrifice, exile and reconciliation. And there's so many stories that evoke it for me. I mean, I could even just look at my bookshelf, but Narnia, Harry Potter, Les Mis, and especially Lord of the Rings, but we'll get to that a little later. So I think there's a temptation here to identify those moments of longing and think that there's something transcendent about the things that we've encountered, the music or the stories or the art, whatever it may be. But Lewis writes this: "The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them, and what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited." So the things that elicit this longing are not the longing itself and must not be mistaken for it. I might return to the Lord of the Rings over and over again, but the source of my longing is not in those books or movies or soundtrack. It only came through them. All these good stories that we love are only pointing us onward towards something deeper, which just leaves us with the inevitable question: what is it exactly that's calling to us? Lewis argues that just as the sensation of hunger proves that humans have a need to eat, and that we live in a world where food exists, he argues that this craving for story and myth suggests the presence of a physiological need that they satisfy. In other words, he says, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. So he argues that this ache that we feel is just a glimpse through a window to another world, one in which your soul would be at home. In his memoir, Surprised by Joy, he calls these yearnings signposts to heaven, basically saying that these signposts are just a reminder that there are far better things ahead than any we leave behind. And isn't that a beautiful thought? Think of everything you love most about this world. Sunsets and mountains and sea, poetry, stories, song, feasts and dancing and friendship. All of these things are only echoes of the beauty that awaits us in heaven. Paul writes in the New Testament, "Now we see through a glass, darkly, what we will one day see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." So if, as C.S. Lewis says, we are not meant for this world, if we are in fact exiles on this earth, awaiting return to the land of our belonging, then it is nothing less than our duty to be imagining this better world that we were made for. And this is where the fantasy genre comes in. So when I first joined the MFA program that I just graduated from, I joined it as kind of an undercover fantasy writer, meaning that I knew fantasy was considered kind of an inferior form of fiction compared to literary fiction. And I wanted to be taken seriously as a writer, but didn't yet know how to defend my love of fantasy. So I kind of just learned to love it in secret, hoping that I could kind of go among their ranks and learn the secrets of the craft without them really knowing what I was writing. And this kind of brings me back to where we started, right? Fantasy is kind of looked down upon because it is a little bit more considered juvenile, that it doesn't really have much to do with the real world, and that it's just kind of an inferior form of literature compared to the great and lofty classics, you know. So it does make me feel a lot better that Tolkien himself reckoned with this argument throughout his life, and he had a great answer for it. So the acclaimed sci-fi and fantasy writer Ursula K. Le Guin had a great way of kind of summarizing Tolkien's argument. And she put it this way: "Yes," he said, "fantasy is escapist, and that is its glory. If a soldier is imprisoned by the enemy, don't we consider it his duty to escape?" And in Tolkien's own words, he wrote, "Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or if when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls? The world outside has not become less real because the prisoner cannot see it. In using escape in this way, the critics have chosen the wrong word. And what is more, they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter. The more time I spend in literature, the more I get this understanding that the truest things in life are that which we can't see and touch. But in stories, we can almost brush up against it. In other words, I think there's something about the act of imagining that reminds us of what's really true. So The Lord of the Rings is often heralded as the best of the fantasy genre. So using Lord of the Rings as an example, I want to show you what this story does to open up the imagination. And minor spoilers to follow. You've been warned. So in The Lord of the Rings, the central character is Frodo Baggins. Frodo is a 3 or 4 foot tall hobbit, and his size means that he is literally incapable of defending himself against the dangers of this world. But his one strength is that he has the ability to resist the lure of corruption. He chooses to carry the One Ring, which is the symbol of ultimate evil, on a quest to destroy it by carrying it to the volcanic mountain where it was forged, and dropping it in to be destroyed. And he is chosen for this quest primarily because of his ability to resist the ring's corruption. His companion and defender is not a noble swordsman, but a friend and gardener, Samwise Gamgee, whose greatest strength is his unswerving loyalty and his ability to remember the goodness of the home that they left behind. So while the two of them are carrying the One Ring to Mordor to destroy it, the rest of humanity is fighting for their lives against the armies of Mordor. So this evil that they're fighting is given physical form of an army of tens of thousands of very creepy looking orcs, which is a way of manifesting the seemingly overwhelming corruption of our world in a way that feels impossible to overcome. And it feels so overwhelming, in fact, that the people of Middle-earth have no choice but to put aside the grievances and differences that divide them and stand together against the coming darkness in order to protect everything they love from destruction, even when to do so feels as if they're facing death itself. So in Return of the King, we get that incredibly powerful scene where the citadel of Gondor is under attack, and just when all hope seems lost, a horn blows in the east, and on the burning edge of dawn, we see the riders of Rohan arrive by the thousands. And this is the point when we get that awesome speech from King Theoden.
Forth, and fear no darkness!
And if you've seen these movies or read the books, you hopefully remember the build-up to this moment, how it really does feel like this is the end. The riders of Rohan are ready to ride into a battle that they are sure is their doom. And yet, their mere appearance at this specific point in the story, just when all hope seems lost, that's a manifestation of the story's themes. So this sudden, joyous turn is a trademark of all good fantasy. Tolkien actually coined a word for this. He calls it the eucatastrophe, this kind of like good catastrophe. The eucatastrophic tale is the true form of a fairy tale, and its highest function. It is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, and gives a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. It is the mark of a good fairy story, of the higher or more complete kind, that however wild its events, however fantastic or terrible the adventures, it can give to child or man that hears it, when that turn comes, a catch of the breath, a beat and lifting of the heart, near to or indeed accompanied by tears, as keen as that given by any form of literary art, and having a peculiar quality. So the eucatastrophe is a glimpse of that ache we were talking about earlier, the good swinging in when all hope seems lost. So do you see what this does? Do you see kind of what Tolkien's doing here? How courage is not just this, but this as well.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you! Come on!
Fantasy is not just wars and swords and sorcery. It's shaping the way we imagine perseverance in the midst of grief, faith in the midst of difficulty, love in the midst of hatred. It gives us hope, and it gives us a new definition of what it means to be a hero. Heroism in Tolkien's world is fighting to protect what is good. We, the audience, might never get the chance to be the Aragorns of the world. You know, the hero who rides into battle and saves the day. But we all, every single one of us, can be a Frodo or a Sam, who are resisting corruption, who are working to protect that which is good in the world. At the end of the last movie, The Return of the King, Aragorn is crowned king of Gondor, and when the hobbits start to bow to him to, pay their respects, he stops them. And he says,
"My friends, you bow to no one."
And then slowly he gets on his knees to honor them, and all the crowds follow. And in this moment, we get this powerful image of the traditional noble warrior hero bowing down before these hobbits. And this theme is everywhere in Tolkien's work, that the small everyday hero who resists corruption is actually more heroic than the warrior charging into battle against evil incarnate. So fantasy allows us to wrestle through these big questions, like what does it mean to be a hero? How do we hold on to hope when it seems like there's nothing left to hope for? Fantasy tackles these questions, it gives them physical form in a way that we can newly imagine. In writing fantasy myself, I found this new imaginative plane on which to work through the struggles in my own life. And that's not unlike literary fiction, I suppose. But the difference between my world and another world is wider with fantasy, allowing me to give new shape to my experiences, to make them manifest, to wrestle through these questions in other people's lives. Questions in particular about grief, like why are love and loss so inextricable? How much of a loved one lives on in us after they die? How do we reckon with the knowledge that everyone we love will pass away? How do we face the inevitability of our own death and our own conflicting desire for deathlessness? So in that sense, fantasy is just a freer way to tell stories that are unconstrained by the rules of the real world. But here's the key. I don't think fantasy just gives us hope for some far-off future, some return of the king, although it does do that too. But more importantly, I think it shapes who we are now. It teaches us to love the pieces of heaven and of goodness that we find in the present. It rips away that veil of disenchantment that's cast over our modern world, and reveals instead this world that's thrumming with magic, with hope. Because we do imagine our world differently, don't we? Coming back from Middle-earth or from Narnia. So we're not just building a bridge of imagination to where we're headed, we're also learning to love the corners of our world, to live the now as deeply as we can, to live with the kind of hope and courage that these characters embody, to see the magic hiding in the everyday, to see the world hiding within the wardrobe. So I guess in conclusion, why is it that we ache for a better world? I think it's because we were made for one. Why do we need tales of courage and love and sacrifice? Because we live in a world that's broken and hurting and longing to be restored. We have this sense that we were made for something better, and every ache we feel reminds us that we were made for that redeemed world. And why does fantasy mysteriously move us? Because it teaches us to love not just the heaven to come, but the pieces of the heaven in the here and now. And as T.S. Eliot writes in the Four Quartets, the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
I'm back.
So what do we do with this homeward ache? Well, first I think you can recognize that secret thread that runs through all the things that you love, but I think we should all be filling ourselves with the good stories, rereading the great ones. Imagine deeply that world you were made for, and maybe most importantly of all, begin to live as if it were already here. And when you encounter something, a piece of art, a story, a song, a memory, anything that kind of sticks in your throat and haunts you with that heartache, the impulse might be to kind of close yourself off from it, to shy away from it so you can get on with your life. But don't do that. Linger with it just a little longer. See where it takes you. So I want to end with a final quote from The Lord of the Rings. In the Two Towers, when Frodo is at his lowest point, when all he can feel is the hopeless despair of the overwhelming task in front of him, he asks Sam what it is that they're holding on to.
What are we holding on to, Sam?
And Sam reaches out a hand, helps up his friend, and he says,
There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
And that, I think, is what I'd like to leave you guys with. That there is some good in this world. And it's not just worth fighting for, it's also worth writing toward. So that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. This video was kind of an adapted version of the talk that I gave as my graduate presentation when I was graduating the MFA program a few weeks ago. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. You can also sign up for my newsletter down below, which goes out once a month, just kind of a letter of things that I'm loving and learning lately. And comment down below if you can kind of trace out that secret thread that runs through the things you love. Just share some of the things that have evoked that ache for you. I would love to hear what they are. And without any further ado, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.